Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another weekend workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about grant writing strategies for women entrepreneurs, and we're so grateful to have you with us. My name is Carrie, and I'm a project manager for the WeCan project, which is led by Queen's University and funded by FedDev Ontario through the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy Ecosystem Fund. So it's so great to have you with us today. And I know that grant writing is a topic that affects everyone, whether you're starting out in business, whether you are in the middle of your business or a bit later. So why don't you just take a moment in the Zoom chat to let us know where you're connecting from. And I'll just continue to let folks in from the waiting room since it's going to be a busy day, I know. So take a moment though to let us know in the Zoom chat where you're connecting from. And while you're doing that, I'll take a moment just to mention that I am connecting to this workshop from the Bay of Quinte region, which is the traditional territory of the Huron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. And it has been my family's honor and privilege to live, work, and play on these lands for the past 18 years. So I hope that no matter where you are in the world, you'll take some time to do some research and find out which First Nations were on the land where you now reside and work. Long before the settlers ever arrived. So thank you so much for sharing in the Zoom chat where you're from today. We're looking forward today to learning about grant writing, of course, and Donna Forrester is here to share with us. And so we are very excited to invite her to dive into this topic. Now, I know that we do have some folks on the call who signed up from outside of Canada. And I just want to highlight the fact that some of the references that Donna is going to be making are Canadian and even Ontario related. So generally speaking, though, the tools, the approaches are going to be quite universal. But I hope that you do find some nuggets, some knowledge nuggets, as I call them, inside this presentation today. I know that you will have at least one aha moment. And so let's dive right into it. Donna, thanks so much for joining us today. I will hand you now the virtual microphone. The floor is yours.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Let me just make sure I can advance my slides. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and for taking some time out to learn about grant writing strategies, particularly for women entrepreneurs. I realize that you have some unique challenges as you think about your grant writing. So I'm hoping, as Carrie mentioned, that you have some moments today when you put some things together differently and are able to come up with some strategies for grant writing for your business in the future. So welcome from wherever you are today. And so I just want to make sure I can get this slide moving forward, which it will take me 1 minute to get the mouse cooperating. Of course, it's going to. There we go. So my hope for this workshop is that by the end of it, you will understand what the basic elements of a grant writing strategy look like, and that you'll have some understanding of why it's so important for you to think of grant writing as both a marketing and a business moment. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each of those elements of grant writing and dive in and give a bit more sort of attention to them, because they're such an important piece of grant writing in general, but also for you as a small business. And then I'm going to introduce you to Porter's 3-paragraph model of grant writing. And Robert Porter is someone who's done a lot of research and writing and thinking about grant writing. And his goal is to make it really accessible and to break it down so that it doesn't seem as daunting. Oftentimes when people start to think about grant writing, they start to get nervous. They think they don't have the capacity to do it. And there's lots of different reasons for this reaction. And certainly Porter is someone who's really trying to build our skills in the area of grant writing. So he has a model he's developed to help us build our thinking and our strategy and our work around grant writing. So I'm going to move ahead. I think you've already read my biography, so you know that I'm a retired executive director. I've worked as a community developer, health promoter. I've written not lots of grants, been very successful, but also had some pretty spectacular failures in grant writing where I've submitted grants and fully expected that they were going to be successful and they weren't. So I've always taken a lessons learned approach from my grant writing and believe that that's a really healthy kind of attitude to take, because not every grant will be successful, but you can certainly learn from every single grant that you submit. So I've certainly been relatively successful, but when I haven't been, I've slowed down, reflected, and learned. And I hope that you will take that attitude as well, of course. So we need to kind of think a little bit about grant writing, and we want to think about it as being both a long-term and a short-term proposition for your business. So we certainly want to think of it strategically, of course. And what does this mean? It means that you really need to think about your business planning and attempt to incorporate grant writing as part of that. Why is that so important? Because you want it to be visible inside your organization and your business. It's important for it to be visible because then you're going to be held accountable to it. So when you set yourself some annual goals each year, and they don't have to be big goals, they can be small goals. They can be starting to do some research on grants that might be appropriate for your business. It can be doing some networking around grant writing. There's lots of ways to incorporate this into your annual business planning cycles, but you really want it to be visible and you want to hold yourself accountable to it, because grant writing is a commitment. There's time attached to it. There's certainly resources attached to it. So make it something that sits inside your business culture and that you commit to it. And you make some informed choices when you make it a part of your strategy as well. And what I mean by this is that you're going to choose which products or services are most appropriate to take out and ask for funding. Not every single program that we offer, not every single product or service that we offer is something that a foundation or a government agency is going to fund. So you really need to look at the programs you offer and the services and try to decide which ones are going to be most marketable and which ones are going to be most fundable. And there's lots of ways that you do that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But the other thing that I mentioned earlier is that, part of having the strategy is building a culture inside your organization that supports grant writing. And that means that there are going to be times when you have to close your door and put a sign on it and say, please do not disturb. And so you want a culture inside your business that supports that sign, the do not disturb, in the middle of a grant message that you need to send to people. So the more you support that inside your business and develop that culture that there are going to be moments when you're not available or accessible to your staff, the better the success you're going to have in hiving off those time periods when you really need to concentrate on grant writing. So there are both long-term and short-term components to this. And I encourage you to think in the long term because it takes time to build grant writing capacity inside your business. There are short-term components to it as well, but try to see it on the longer view as something, a skill you're going to grow inside your agency and your business. So the long-term piece of it is really important. Why? Because it takes time to get funded. If you think about funding cycles, sometimes they're 12 months to 18 months before you submit your application. So you begin thinking about applying, you submit the application, you wait to hear back from the funder, and you receive the money. There can be quite a time lag there. So you need to think long-term no matter what, because it takes time to get funded. Also, you may, in the initial iterations of your grant writing, not be successful, which is completely acceptable because many applications aren't funded for a variety of reasons. First of all, funding organizations don't always have enough money to fund every great idea that's submitted. Governments also have limits on funding. Sometimes, unfortunately, despite our best efforts, we don't complete the application correctly. It happens. And I always say the devil's in the detail in grant writing, and it's very easy to miss small details. I was speaking to a friend last year who submitted a funding application and forgot to push the submit button. She completed the entire application and forgot to push the button. So the devil's in the details. Sometimes we make errors that we just can't control for. So we need to be prepared for this as a long-term strategy. And sometimes, despite our best efforts, we don't make good choices in the fit between our goals and the funder's goals. So we just need to recognize it takes time and skills and resources, and be patient with the process. It is a long-term strategy. There are two things you need to do to think longer term. And one is that you want to start building your evidence. And so what I mean by this is in your business, hopefully you're doing client and customer satisfaction surveys already that have both qualitative and quantitative sections. And if you don't, then you need to start building those satisfaction surveys soon. The reason why is that they're going to give you quotes that you're going to be able to use for your grant writing, and grant funders love quotes. I see a hand up.
Okay, Donna.
Hi.
Hi, I'm an epileptic, okay? And you're talking so fast that my brain's trying to.
Lisa, what we'll do is we're recording it as well. So I'm going to make sure that you get a copy of the slides and the recording. So don't worry about it. I'll make sure to take care of you afterwards.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries.
But thank you for that feedback, Lisa, and I will do my best to slow down. I'm excited about the topic, and I forget sometimes that I do kind of get moving and want to kind of share all my kind of knowledge with you. So thank you for that, cueing me. So it is so important, if you haven't done so already, to be integrating client customer satisfaction surveys into the work that you are doing. You want the qualitative sections because you want quotes, and you will use these in your grant writing, or you should use these in your grant writing. And you also want statistics. So you want to know how many people you served last year, how many group members attended, how many by age, if you can quote by age, how many women are in your using your services. So you need both of these. And so good statistics will be well integrated into your grant writing strategy. It takes time, again, to build a really good survey, to integrate it, to implement it, and then to start pulling the data from it. So this is why you need to think longer term about grant writing and not short term. And you also need to recognize that you will need to build your internal capacity. So you're going to have to learn how to write a grant. You're going to have to learn how to read a grant application. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that toward the end of this seminar, but it does take time to open up that grant application, to understand the eligibility criteria, to understand what they're looking for in terms of the questions and answers, the format, and all the protocols around grant writing. So it's not something that you can do on a short term. It's something that needs to be on a long-term horizon. However, there are things that you can do sooner than later. So remember, like, grant writing is information-based. And so there are a number of documents and pieces of information you're going to need in order to complete that grant application. And these are things you can start compiling in the short term. And so you know where your audited financial statements are, you know where your business plans are, you know where all of the little pieces of information are that you're going to need to start filling out the grant application. So start looking for them and start placing them in a folder and deciding how you're going to name that folder and how you're going to store that information. So it's really important in the short term to start organizing yourself and thinking about how you're going to organize your information. This I call building your knowledge management system. And in the world of grant writing, we talk about knowledge management as being a really important piece that you will rely on when you're doing your grant writing. And knowledge management is simply put, the structure and process that businesses will use to both save and retrieve information. And you need to learn how to do this in a really intentional and organized way. Every organization and business does this in a different way. And so you need to talk to your managers, you need to talk to your accountants, you need to talk to the various people in your organization who have information that you need and decide how you're going to organize it. It sounds strange to think about this, but when you head into a grant application, time becomes very compressed and it becomes very rushed, and you're often looking for information very quickly. And so that's why you want everything organized in advance. So you can set up a grant writing folder and you can decide to set it up by year. So 2022 grants, 2021, 2020. So you can do it by year, or you can do it by grant. You can, have an organization that you think you may apply to on a regular basis and have all your grants to that organization inside one folder. The difficulty with the information challenge is that in most businesses, information is siloed. So one person who is in a customer-facing role has a lot of information about the feedback they're getting from customers. The accountant and the bookkeeper have a different piece of information about the quantitative and financial side of the business. And you as a manager may have a different perspective again. So knowledge management systems are really meant to try to integrate those various sources of information and make sure when you're in the middle of that grant and you start to pull information that you know where to get it. Because it's heavily based on information. And usually the person who's writing the grant is not the person who has all the information that they need. So they're reaching out either electronically and or face-to-face to get information. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it's where your business culture and creating that atmosphere where people realize there are going to be times when I'm asking you for information and it's going to be on a short timeline and I'm going to need the turnaround fairly quickly, that they then realize, okay, Donna's writing a grant, she's looking for information, I need to get it to her as soon as possible. So understand your knowledge management system, understand where your documents are stored, and have some agreed upon conventions. Certainly when I was working at the not-for-profit agency here in Kingston, when I was a coordinator, I didn't have access to all the documents that I needed for grant writing. That's another really important point. Sometimes only managers and directors have access to financial data, to the wages of other employees. So there's some information that's protected inside a business or an organization. And again, you need to kind of think about those challenges and how you're going to manage them when you're writing grants, because you do need to cost them and you need to have some understanding of that. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the marketing and business side of grant writing. And again, just keeping in mind that this is a really important piece of everything you're doing when you set out to do grant writing, that there are marketing and business sides to everything that you're doing. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in the next slide, but certainly there's business cards there, because I think of our business cards and making sure that all the details are attended to on that business card, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So one thing I want you to remember is that everything that you do as a business is marketing. And when I was an executive director, I reminded our staff of this constantly. So when we were in the public view, when we were working with clients, everything we do says something about the business we're in. And so when we think about grants and writing a grant, that's also a way for you to tell your story about your business. The people who are reviewing your grants are potentially future clients or customers. So even think from that perspective, they don't know your business, they don't know you. And so you're given an opportunity to tell your story to an audience. So each grant has to be viewed as an opportunity to tell your story. The marketing that you've done in other venues will be used in grant writing and can be used in grant writing. So what I mean by that is that you may have gone out to a business fair in October and you may have developed some info sheets and some infographics, and you may have developed, your business cards. So you don't need to recreate the wheel for the grant writing. You want to go back to that marketing that you've used and look at it and see if it can be useful in your grant writing. And I know at Resolve, we had done some really amazing infographics for different grants, but we use them in other grant writing opportunities as well. The thing that you want to do is review all of that material really carefully. Logos change, staff change. You need to check the dates. Programs also change and need to be updated. So go back over your marketing materials and look at them carefully for details, dates, and that they are coordinated and they are in sync with what the grant is that you're applying for. So you will use your grant, your marketing materials in many venues, but remember, of course, too, finally, that when you're successful in a grant, you're going to be given a lot of publicity. You're going to use it on your web page. Certainly the funder is going to use it on the web page. There's a lot of marketing that goes along with a successful grant as well. So there's lots of marketing that goes on inside the grant writing itself as you educate the panelists about your business and as you promote your success when you do achieve that in the grant writing. So there is a business side to all of this as well. So this is where knowing your numbers is really important. And I know you've had presentations on this recently. I follow Carrie's digest that she sends out on a regular basis. And I know there was a presentation recently on knowing your numbers. But this is a really important part of grant writing. And again, something that you should always be thinking about, that you're going to have to calculate the cost of doing a grant. There are both obvious costs, and then there are indirect costs as well. So you need to, take into account staff time and who's going to be affected by this grants that you're applying for, whose time is going to be carved out to help with running the grant, the cost of running a group, the cost of a new product, the materials that you're going to need. You want to cost all that out. Most grant writing want to see all your costs. You may only be asking for a small amount of reimbursement from a particular grant opportunity, but usually they want to see all your costing and know that you've got some plan for all of your costs. You also need to think about the hidden costs, and this is something that I learned the hard way myself when I was doing grant writing, that there are things that you don't always think about, like the cost to your receptionist, for example. So you're developing a new product and you're asking for funding. There's going to be a receptionist who's answering the phone. And you're going to also have a bookkeeper who has to take account of the project and all of the costs associated with it. So you need to take into account their time as well. And that should be an important part of your budget. Those may be in-kind contributions that you make to the grant, but nonetheless, you need to account for those inside the grant that you're writing. So the grant writing and numbers and knowing your business, what is your cost per unit? What is your, the receptionist cost? If you're donating the cost of the reception to this project, which you could, legitimately do, you still need to know her cost per hour and how many phone calls you think she's going to be taking and what the impact on her workload would be. So there's definitely a number crunching element to this, and keep that in mind. So another sort of piece to the grant writing, which is really important, is to really understand what your value proposition is. Remember that the funders don't necessarily know anything about your business and the uniqueness of it. Most of us pour our hearts and souls into the businesses that we're developing, but you need to know what your value proposition is. What are you offering? Why should they fund it? What need are you addressing? You have a particular reason for developing your business. There's some product that you've developed to meet a specific need that you have anticipated. You're responding to something in the community, in your own community. There must be something unique about it, and you want to tell the funders what that is. So there's something that you as a business owner sees as setting you apart from others. There's lots of competition in the marketplace, lots of people with similar products. And so you do want to know what makes your product unique. And so again, as you head into this grant writing, the business side of this, there is a real element to making the argument that you are selling something. You want to know that you're unique and how you're unique from other people in the marketplace. There is another piece here which is important, and it's often a misunderstanding that people think they cannot reach out to funders in advance of applying for funding. We have the impression that that would be a conflict of interest for the funder. It's actually not true. Many funders will answer questions. They do want to have a relationship with you. They want to get to know you, and it's very appropriate to call them and ask specific questions. Again, getting to know them could be something as simple as going on their website. What you're going to get from that website is their values, the language they're using to describe their funding and who they fund. And you're going to get a hint as to whether there's going to be a good fit between you and the funder. There are lots of ways that you can find foundations and government grants. There are lots of links. Carrie does provide a weekend digest. Is that what it's called, Carrie? Yes,
Weekly digest.
Weekly digest. And I've been watching the various iterations of the digest over the past few weeks, and often she will cue you in that digest to funding opportunities through the government. And so it's always worthwhile to take a look at those sites, because usually the government's fairly good at describing eligibility criteria. They don't want to waste your time. They want you to understand specifically who particular grants are targeted toward. But it's perfectly legitimate to call a funder to ask more detail and to find out whether this could be a particularly good fit for you. There is actually I've included a link there to Canadian foundations. That is a really good site for learning a little bit about the various philanthropic organizations in Canada and the types of projects they fund. So go on to that site, https://pfc.ca. And you'll find there a list of many different foundations in Canada, and it will give you actually a lot of really good information about how much money is sitting in those foundations, what their kind of orientation is. And I certainly was looking there this morning and was just looking at the kinds of projects that are being funded. I did kind of quickly Google this morning for foundations for female entrepreneurs and came across a Lochner Foundation. So if you do your Google searches, you'll start to kind of come up with some really good foundations as well that will help you with funding. But certainly go to that link and you'll find some more information about Canadian foundations. So there's one other piece to all of this, of course, with the business side, which is to look to the future. And so you really want to show a grant, when you're applying for a grant, that you understand your industry and that you know what current and future pressures are and what some solutions are. It seems strange to think of this, but a few years ago inside of the counseling world, we were really struggling with web-based counseling. So 10 years ago, no one wanted to do it. We knew we had to do it, that it was certainly a need that hadn't been filled. It was a gap. And it was an industry trend, and our staff needed to be trained on it. But my gosh, like we really hesitated to kind of advance the understanding of web-based counseling. There was a period of time when there was a lot of hesitation. COVID, thankfully enough, solved that problem for us. And within a period of about 2 months, all counseling agencies were providing web-based counseling with support from the federal government, of course. But this was a future pressure that we were anticipating a few years ago, 10 years ago. And, unfortunately, we didn't kind of rise to the challenge until we were forced to. We knew it was a pressure on counseling agencies, but we really hesitated to enter into that field. We know that there are always solutions to any sort of pressure, and there are always innovations. And so you want to demonstrate when you're writing a grant that you know what these are and that you have control over your content area. And that you know where you want it to head, and maybe you're out front and you are leading innovation and you want the grant writers to know that as well. So important to show that you've got control over the topic and that you've done your research. You may, from your customer satisfaction surveys, for example, have received some feedback about gaps in services. And you can use that as something that's a future pressure and something that needs to be addressed inside the industry. So your clients may tell you where you need to go, and maybe the research tells you, but certainly your customers and your clients may also lead you to where you need to be developing new services in the future as well. So remember the business side of this. There are many kind of elements to it, but certainly being aware of the future and where you're headed as an industry is important too. So we're going to talk a little bit here about grant writing as storytelling. I love this photograph of a family who I'm assuming have received services and supports from an organization and a business. And we can tell their story. We can share something about this family, hopefully from the business we've worked, whether it's a Muslim resource support center, or whether it's a community agency, whether it's a health center. Like, there's many stories we can tell about our clients, and we need to integrate storytelling into the grant writing that we are doing. So it's important to be able to tell a story about your clients, and we want to be numbers oriented, and we know we need statistics when we're grant writing, but we also need to break it down to one customer, one story, one impact. And so that's why storytelling is such an important part of grant writing. It's telling the story about you as a business, but it's also telling a story about the impact that you've had on your customers. We also know we all like a really good story. Why? Because humans are drawn towards stories. We're drawn towards the drama of a good story. We're drawn towards the problem of a good story and the resolution of that problem. So storytelling, apparently, and I do believe, is an important part of grant writing, but it's also part of who we are as human beings, that we're drawn towards a story. So grant writing as storytelling, it means you have to be able to narrate a story. It means you need to be able to have some control over the story you are telling. You want to be able to connect with the reader. You want to be able to tell an energetic and compelling story, and you want a strong plot. These are all really important. If you think about stories that you've read as children, the stories, the movies that you've loved as an adult, there are things that have drawn you into the story that are important. And these three key elements of connecting with the reader, making sure you maintain a momentum, and then have a strong plot are really important to that. So it's about telling the story of your clients and about having a compelling story about your business. You could have an incredible founder story that's important for grant writers to know. So I don't know which piece of the story you're going to tell. That will be your decision, but you can certainly tell the story of your business, but you also want to tell the story of your clients too. So let's talk a little bit more about the empathy that's important here. We know that the human face is the important interface in grant writing. What tends to happen, or one criticism of grant writing, is that we are too academic and we use big words. We talk about big problems, and we forget that we need to always be able to kind of narrow down to a human impact, that one person is being affected, one community, one neighborhood. So we need to get to that human sort of face of the story. It's best when you can take your business outcomes and translate them to one person who's been affected. Readers want this. They want that individual impact story. And this will help to illuminate, of course, the work you are doing. We know that one person being impacted is a start, and it's an important piece of the work that you're doing. And if you can narrow it down and tell one story, then you can extrapolate from there as well. So we want to create that empathy in the reviewers. We want them to immediately be grabbed by the story you're telling, and you do that by creating a human element, of course. You're going to need to, when we think about what draws people into stories, again, oftentimes it's the changes that are experienced by people. So we want to know that something has changed and your customers are better. They are, experiencing life in a different way, whether you're offering a meditation or a yoga or a spa service or a counseling service. We want to know that people are changed and impacted by the services you're providing. And the grant writers want to know that you're making an impact. So you're going to tell the stories that highlight the changes that your customers experience. That goes back again to those customer satisfaction surveys and getting the qualitative components, asking the questions that elicit that information that allows you to show impact and change and outcomes in your customers.
Donna, could I just insert a quick question here? Chantal has asked, can you use more than one human impact story to show the range of your service?
Absolutely. Yes, there's no limit to how you do that. And certainly what grant writers want to know, of course, is that you have impact, and multiple impacts and different impacts are also a useful element in the story writing. So when we talk about plot, again, remember the 5 W's, the who, what, where, and when. So from the grant writer's perspective, remember, they don't know you and they are trying to make a decision about whether to fund your business. So they need to know who's asking for the funds. So you need to show the grant reviewers that you actually are able to do the project, that you are the right business for this project, and that you are a credible business, that you have some history, that you're not new onto the scene, that you have some sort of established track record. How you show them that will be different, and you will have different pieces of information you'll use for that. But you want to be able to show that you are here, that you've arrived at this place today, and that you have some credibility to carry out the project. Most grant writers, most grant reviewers want to know that they're investing in an organization who will be able to complete the project. It's very easy to get the funding. It's actually harder to complete it than we realize. So grant writers want to know, grant reviewers want to know that you have the ability to invest, to sustain, and to complete. So that's the who piece of this. They also want to know why, that you've clearly stated why you need the money. So you need to, why this project should be funded. And so you're going to have lots of different pieces of evidence. Hopefully you've done a really good literature review. You've got good satisfaction surveys that are giving you information. You may know your business community. You may have gone on to various profile sites in Kingston to know a little bit about the demographics of our community. That's always really helpful information to have when you're grant writing. So you can use that demographic profiling information about our local community to inform the why of this project and why it should be funded. And you want to know, of course, the grant reviewers are going to want to know why your project is going to solve the problems that you've outlined. So there's some big questions that get answered, and the why is an important piece of this, and you need some information in order, and some data to explain that. I think literature reviews are a really important piece of grant writing. They show that you've gone out and kind of done some preliminary reading about the problem and about the community. There's lots of really good demographic information that you can access through your community foundations here in Kingston. They do some great demographic profiles. The Kingston Public Health Unit has some great demographics of our local community as well. So those are pieces of information that you would want to possibly integrate into a grant. How's your project designed? How are you going to deliver it? And how's the work going to be achieved? So there are some pieces here that you can explain to the grant writers. One piece of the how, which might be a little bit new to you, but you want to anticipate any possible risks that could be a part of your project. Why that's important is it's showing a good risk management analysis to the grant reviewers. You want to anticipate any particular risks that could be a part of the grant. And so you also want to show that you've taken them into account and that you're going to address them through the grant itself. So it's always a nice thing to be able to include, like if there are risks, that you've attended to them and that you're aware of them as well. And that would be in your project design. Final element, of course, is the what. So you need to be really clear what the need is, what's the project going to do, what are the actual activities that you're going to be engaged in, and the intended impact. So what the need is, and what are the benefits. So there's lots of pieces of information here that you need to include in this kind of final piece of the section on the grant writing as storytelling, but also on having a really strong plot. So I'm going to move here to Porter's 3-paragraph model of grant writing. And again, this is really meant to demystify grant writing, to build capacity, to help you understand that grant writing is doable, that there are things that you can do to start grant writing today, to start building your skills today for grant writing. And so Porter has developed this 3-paragraph model. It can be you can Google it and find out more about it if you like. I certainly have the references I can share with you as well. But it's a really active, strong, energetic approach to describing your project. And it's really meant to kind of clearly define what it is you're going to hope to achieve. So an example here is, and I'm going to read these because the screen is kind of covered up there. But our aim with this innovative business plan is to improve the supply of well-trained tourism specialists in our local community. So that's a very clear statement about a small operator potential business here in our Kingston community who wants to improve the supply of well-trained tourism specialists. So we know exactly what that project is about by that strong opening statement. Another strong opening statement, this project will provide our community with 2 powerful tools to improve tourist spending in downtown businesses. So again, you're making a really strong opening statement about what your project is. Another really strong statement, our project will increase the supply of locally trained tourism experts. Furthermore, it will share their expertise through our new easy-to-use app, which locates experts within a 15-minute walk of any place in the downtown core. Very strong statement. We know exactly what that project is going to do. So Porter is really hoping here through his 3 paragraphs to get people to be very strong, energetic, clear, and direct about what they're doing. The reason why this model is so important is that we know that grant reviewers often make up their minds in the very first page, and it's difficult to shift them afterwards. They admit this. It's not necessarily the best approach, but first impressions do matter in grant writing. And so that's where those strong statements are so important, that you're making a really clear and good impression at the very beginning of your grant. You want to evoke this positive response. You want to intrigue them. You want to pique their interest in your particular grant. And so that's why this 3-paragraph model is useful. One of the things I think that's really important about Porter and his approach is that he will get you to look at your application from the perspective of the reader and someone who doesn't know your work. So I have always encouraged in all of the grant writing that I've supported and done to step back at a certain point and look at the grant and think, I don't know anything about this agency. All I have in front of me is the information they've shared about their organization. What do I know them based on the answers to the questions that they have provided? So you have to step out and be really objective. I know we love our businesses and we're proud of them. And it's very hard to be objective about your own writing. I admit that. I have that problem myself. When I write something, I usually think it's pretty good. That's why I want someone to review it for me with that lens of, this is someone who doesn't know anything about our business. What are we saying about our business? And are we saying the things we want to say about our business? So have someone take a look, review it. You yourself, if you can be objective, take a look through that lens.
Donna, could I slip in here just with a quick question? Maxine has asked, would you make this statement? So I'm assuming, Maxine, you're talking about the 3 power statements that she just went through from Porter. Would you do that after the background work is done? Would you do that before?
I would do it after the background work is done. Reason being, you've done your literature, you've done your you read through your customer satisfaction surveys, you've got a really strong idea of what the needs are out there, and it will help you to be really succinct about what is the gap that I'm trying to fill here, what is the need I'm responding to, and you want all that information sitting there as you write that statement. So do all the background work, and play with it. Try to have some fun. I've always encouraged people when they're doing the research, really, that should be the interesting part of what you're doing. Google, go to the health unit sites, go to the community foundations. There's so many profiles on our community that you can pull information from. Try to enjoy that piece of it, because it gets harder as you go. And certainly that first opening statement is a challenge. So do the background work first. Now I've lost my little thing again. So the first paragraph of his model sets the stage. So it lays out the problem, stresses the need, answers the question, who cares? It gets your reviewers interested with that strong opening statement, describes the current situation and its limitations. It should be very simple, 4 sequential statements. Take home message, start writing. The sooner you start, after you've done your review, after you've done your sort of information gathering, is to start and work at it and have people review it. The second stage is your solution. So in the first piece of this, you've identified a problem. Now you want to show that you're credible, you know how to solve it, and that you've outlined a solution to this. So it's your idea, this is your project, and what are you going to do to solve the problem? And you want to, in this place, you're speaking to your credibility, to your business history, to, you know, the services that you provide once you're hoping to develop it, but that you understand the business, you understand this problem, you're familiar with it, and you know how to move it forward. So this is your chance to kind of establish your credibility. And the final paragraph creates a vision for the world after the project is completed. So what's going to be different, and how is the world going to be better? How are you advancing the field that you work in and the services that you provide? The world is going to be different by virtue of this grant. And so you want to explain to the grant funding organization how the world is going to be better and what's going to be different. So if you're introducing a new service, a new product, you're bringing something new on side, you need to have an idea of how the world is going to be better and improved by virtue of this project and this product being introduced. So don't be shy. It's an important piece of the funding application, and your chance to tell the funder organization how you think you're going to make a difference. So we were just chatting a little bit in advance of this presentation about the organization I used to work for was a small not-for-profit organization here in Kingston. We had about 50 employees, and it was a social enterprise, which means that we had both a not-for-profit and a for-profit component. So it was a revenue generating business on one side, and then also we relied on government funding on the other half of the organization. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how we used one particular opportunity from the provincial government for funding here of our local organization. And again, through Carrie's weekly digest, you'll see she talks often about the Canada-Ontario job grant. You'll see that sort of thread coming up in the various pieces of information. But here locally, we do have I think it's Restart that does the Canada-Ontario job grants here in Kingston. But if you go onto their webpage, you can look a little bit at what they fund. I did go on to look a little bit at their eligibility criteria this morning and learn a little bit about the organization. We actually did use it quite often in our local counseling agency. But they do provide grants to local businesses and not-for-profit organizations. We used it for various training opportunities inside our organization. So for example, we were required by the government of Ontario to be able to provide services in both English and French. And we did have a number of staff who were somewhat bilingual at varying degrees of fluency in French language. And so we needed to have people who are actually advanced in their language skills as well. So we applied to the Ontario, Canada job grants to do French language training of our staff at our local office. And so we had about 12 staff who signed up for this. And we had a French language service provider come to our organization once a week for 3 months for a morning. And so she would work with people who are at a basic French level, people who are at an intermediate, and people who are at advanced level. And so we advanced our French language skills inside our organization, both on our business side and our not-for-profit side. So that was a really good use that we had of that Canada Ontario job grant. It certainly wouldn't have been something we could have afforded to do in our organization as a not-for-profit and a small business, but we were required by the government to provide these services, and it was quite beneficial to us. Now, we did have sort of the typical problems of people dropping out. People didn't realize 12 weeks means 12 weeks, and you need to be there every week for the training. And so that was kind of difficult for us. And you do have to report on these grants. And it was a good lesson for us, an introduction to Canada Ontario job grants, because they are investing in a local business organization. And again, they want to know that if you've signed up 12 employees, that those 12 employees will complete the program. When some of our employees dropped out, the provincial government service provider wanted to know why that had happened. So we had to provide them with some explanation as to what happened there. So we did also use these grants for training our staff on new software that we had purchased, where we had a new accounting software program and new staff. And unfortunately, they were not familiar with the software we were using, which was absolutely critical to one of our programs that we offered. And so we used a Canada Ontario job grant to train our staff on this new software. So we were able to take advantage of that Canada Ontario job grant several times to train our organization and staff. One other way that we used it, we wanted to develop a new product, which was harassment investigations. With the new Bill 168 that came out, we wanted to take that possibility of doing workplace harassment investigations out. It was a new product that we were developing. And so we applied to Canada Ontario job grants to train 8 of our staff on harassment workplace investigations. So that was another way. But if I'm not going to go to this website right now, I'm a little bit concerned I'm going to lose the screen. But if you take the time at some point to go on to that link there, which is the Government of Ontario site for the Canada Ontario job grants, you're going to see all kinds of information that comes up. Of course, it's grant writing, and they will provide, job grants inside of local businesses. There's some things that they're particularly concerned about, and you'll notice when you go on their site that they want to know about the trainer. So it's really important to them, if they're investing a significant amount of funding in your organization, that you are hiring somebody who actually has the qualifications to do the training that you're asking them to do. So they want to know that there's some credibility there. And they will ask you about the trainer. They will ask for information about the person providing the trainer. They want to make sure that there's no conflict of interest. So for example, if you're receiving training on a new software package, that the trainer is not the person who sold that software package to you. So they're quite concerned about conflicts of interest and that there aren't any. And they want to know exactly what the training is that's going to take place, and that this vendor has the ability to do the training. Again, they're investing in your business. They want to know that the money that they're investing will be well used. And the trainer that you choose is an important piece of that. Of course, with the Canada Ontario job grant as well, when you dig a bit deeper into that site, you're going to notice that there's a cost sharing element to that. So if you have more than 100 employees, they will expect that cost sharing to be about 50% of the total cost. So again, you look at your employee size and you'll quickly know what cost you're looking at. If you have less than 100, you're going to pay about 1/6 of the cost. So again, you can start to get estimates, you can start to reach out to vendors, and you'll start to get a pretty quick estimate of costs. and you'll know what your cost is. If you have fewer than 100 employees, your cost is 1/6.
Donna, there's a
Mhm.
couple questions with regards to the case study example. Maxine asks, in the example that you gave, did you change the training you were providing for that particular French language training? I'm not sure, Maxine. Is that clear to you, Donna?
Mhm.
Oh,
Well,
you received funding for the French language training.
Mhm.
You lost some of the participants.
Yes.
Were you able to then use those dollars for the second project, or did you lose those dollars?
No, we didn't lose the dollars on the, it's a really good question. Thank you, by the way, for that question, because what we had were 3 groups. So we had a total cost from that vendor for the training based on the 3 groups. And I think there was like 4, there were like 4, maybe in the introductory group, there was like 6, and then in the intermediate, there were 3, and then in the advanced, there were 3 as well, something like that. So the 2 people who dropped out in that instance were in the basic level training. And so it was a group price that we had received. So thankfully enough, it didn't affect the funding, the total funding that we had received. My experience with the Canada Ontario Job Grants is that they're pretty reasonable group to work with. And I'm sure if there had been something that was prohibitive, they would have worked with us. We had so many grants that we had applied to from them over the years, and I found them to be an extremely well-informed and supportive source of funding for our business and our not-for-profit. But certainly the total amount was never impacted. And I think it was because we set it up as a group instruction session in the first place. Likely, if it had been individual French language training, they would have adjusted the grant somehow. I think that would have been the case, but I don't know for sure on that one.
I believe I had the same trainer and the same program at the federal government.
Okay, well, she
I
was
think it was the same. I think it was the same instructor because she was going to Kingston too, many
Okay.
years ago.
Yeah, that's probably her, and she was a
Yeah,
great trainer, but
and
she was
yeah.
she made sure we did our homework, that's for sure.
Oh, it was brutal.
It was. Well, we were always afraid of her, oddly enough. So every week when she came, we made sure we were ready for our lessons.
So Donna, there's just one other question with regards to the case study. Sam is asking, this scenario describes getting funding for one element of a larger project. Does this approach increase the chances, just lost the question on here, increase the chances of getting funding for new businesses as opposed to applying for funding that covers, general or global business costs?
It has to be like the Canada Ontario job grants are really specific to training needs inside organizations. They do want to know that you have some kind of a track record as an organization or a business. So I believe they actually have a time requirement. Again, I was looking at the Canada Ontario job grant the other day, and I think you need to have been in business for a year before you can apply to this particular grant. Again, if you think that most of these grants, they're concerned to know that you can carry out, once they hand you the money, they want to know that you're actually going to be able to carry out the grant. So they want to know that you've been in business, that you have some kind of a track record as a business. And so there is a timing element to it. I don't know if that answers your question, but certainly, it wouldn't have prohibited us from going off to get other grants, if that's your question, because we were like with the software training, for example, we had a specific new piece of software that we had purchased, not from the vendor. And we were getting training on that particular software. It didn't mean that we couldn't have gone to other grant opportunities to get funding on other pieces of work that needed to be done inside the organization or even inside that particular program at that time. So I think it's really worthwhile taking a look at the Canada Ontario job grant. We had very good success with it over time inside our, both on our business side and our not-for-profit. Again, there are, like, if you read through and learn, like, to be patient with yourself to understand what they're telling you in the information, there are some things that you can apply for and others are not going to be funded. So they will never train executives, for example, to be trained. They won't train on MBAs or any sort of executive training programs. Business owners normally don't receive training either. So it's really for those mid-level, kind of lower level employees.
Donna, Lisa has a question. Just have to unmute yourself. There you go.
All right. Yeah, Donna, do you have any experience in the Indigenous grants from the government?
I don't have any. I have worked with Indigenous. I've worked with the Tyendinaga Reserve here in southeastern Ontario on projects, but we were going out to Trillium Foundation. We were going to Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation. So we were looking for funding in a partnership format, and Tyendinaga was an important piece of our partnership around health outcomes in the Quinte area, for example. So I've worked
That's
with
from my
them.
area of where I'm from, so.
Pardon me?
It's the area that I'm from. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I've worked very closely. I can say that one of the links I followed from Carrie last week took me to the Ontario government and their funding opportunities. And there are certainly a number of funding opportunities for Indigenous organizations right now. So one of the things about grant writing is that from year to year, you will really see themes that the organization or that the provincial government is funding. Indigenous funded organizations right now are a really important emphasis for the provincial government. And if you go follow the link to the provincial government and their funding of various kind of initiatives, there's youth initiatives, there's various kind of Indigenous funding opportunities right now. It's a really good opportunity inside the provincial government, certainly for Indigenous organizations.
Thank you.
And Lisa, if you reach out to Quabiz, I know you know Shira and Rye Barberstock, they would probably be your best resource for Indigenous grants.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Donna.
Indigenous grants, yeah, actually, I was gonna say, Carrie, we just did one with them. It was a really good workshop. They had lots of good information. But if you put in the Indigenous, if you go in Ontario and in the government of Canada, and you put in just like Indigenous specific, it'll pull up a whole bunch of things through there. And then it's just a matter of weeding out what you don't want to deal with.
Right. And if you want some direct support, Lisa, Quabiz can help you with that for sure. So send them an email. They'll be happy to help.
I talk to Shira and Rye quite often.
Good. You let them know we sent you.
I will. Thanks, Carrie.
So and just so that's one of the Canada Ontario Job Grant is certainly one of the grants that our small organization here in Kingston was able to take advantage of on several occasions and really benefited from being able to access it. So I'm just going to move along here and just a couple more slides to think about. Again, we talked a lot about the long and the short kind of term planning that you need to do when you're grant writing. And it's just so important to think that there are many different activities associated with grant writing, and you need to be organized. I think, as I said earlier, the devil's in the details here. So, and oftentimes there's more than one person involved in writing a grant. And there are various templates that you can develop. I'm going to show you a couple here that I've developed. But you can do this on a timeline. There's all kinds of ways of organizing yourself, but you really want to kind of set out some activities and kind of try to keep yourself organized throughout the grant writing cycle. So one sort of document that I came up with, which I thought was a good way to do this, was to do an actual grants to-do list. So I like this because it sort of lays out some typical things that you're going to need to think about when you're organizing a grant. So you need your business number, you need the date. You often want to know how long you've been in business. So you need your foundation, your date your business started. You need to know your services offered, any business plans you have, your audited financials, of course, any customer impact surveys. Customer numbers are really important. Year over year, any sort of projected growth you have for your numbers, any references that you're going to use. So remember that you work with other businesses, you know, people who know your business well, and you're going to be asking people for references to support your application. It's often a very nice touch to include references on your funding application. Any sort of previous grants that you've had, you want them tucked away as well, and all your marketing materials. So what this table shows is who has the information. So just remember, somebody in your agency has it, and you need to know who that person is. And so when you need to reach out to get it, you aren't struggling to run to the receptionist to say, who's got the information on last year's, who compiled our customer satisfaction surveys? Where are they sitting? I need that information. So you want to identify who's got that information. Somebody has it. Oftentimes we don't know, actually, oddly enough, even in a small agency with staff turnover, we don't always know who's compiling those surveys and who's inputting and where it is. We want to know the document location, where it is in our computer filing systems, and when it's been completed. So you can tick off saying, I spoke to, you know, Jenna. She told me the location of the document and that I completed this in January. So this.
Sorry, Donna, quick question on the audited financials. Does this refer to year-end tax reports, Maxine is asking?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you will have had those, you will have them for several years, and they will want, you know, oftentimes they will ask you for your recent financials as part of writing a grant. For not-for-profits, we call them audited financials. You may add your year-end tax information, but normally they will want, they will actually ask you information from your tax return anyways on various programs and products. So you want to have that information somewhere organized that you, when you need it, you can pull it and be able to reference it. The next way of organizing this, if it helps at all, at least certainly for me, running an organization, we set up a group of us, and we would come together in January. We would assemble the team. Usually there were 3 or 4 people. Again, be realistic. I don't know the size of your organization. I don't know the skill level in your business or your organization, but you know, usually it's good to have a group of people who are involved. Some people have better grant writing skills and actually like it and enjoy it. Other people are more the program managers, but they have information to feed into grant writing. So you want to talk a little bit about workload and who's going to do what. Whether it's even feasible for you in a given year. You may be heading into a year, which is you're developing a new office location. You may be engaged in an office move. You may be there may be some staff turnover that you're anticipating. So you need to kind of take a look at your team and your workload and make a decision as to whether or not this is the year for you to start to do some grants or to continue to write grants. Certainly when we were sitting down as an organization and thinking about this, there was a lot of concern about workload. And so again, you need somehow to figure out how you're going to support your staff as they head into you know, any grant writing that you agree to do. You need to identify the programs that you think are most fundable, have an open, transparent conversation, which products are most fundable. It sounds like a terrible way to frame it, but some products are more fundable, some programs are more fundable. We know that youth, we know that you know, multicultural, we know that Indigenous, you know, homelessness. There are certain initiatives now that are top priority for funders. So you need to know what those needs look like and which of your products or programs fit them. Choose 1 or 2, start to get your documents together. So again, this is just a nice way to kind of think about what you're doing. If this is on a calendar year, bringing people together and starting to think about who's going to be the most responsible person for all this. At the end of the day, you want one person identified who's doing the grant writing and responsible. Otherwise, it's too confusing. So I love this slide because it's just a really good slide to remind us that there's lots of ways that we can get ground down in grant writing and lose our focus and just not get the grant out the door in a timely fashion. So just a couple things to remember and not to do. Try not to claim your project's revolutionary. don't boldface it, don't cut and paste from previous applications with different font sizes. You don't use business specific terms without defining them. And always remember that you've got to broaden this impact out to a larger community. Unfortunately, I hate to say that I've made most of these mistakes at some point along the way. It's, you cutting and pasting is a really common error, and it's always mortifying when you get to the grant review panel and they tell you, did you use your last year's application to do this one? And yeah, well, we can tell because you got different font sizes. And it's like, okay, lesson learned. I will never do that again. So try to realize again that grant reviewers are a stickler for details, and they will pick up. Again, they've just got your electronic copy, your paper copy. That's all they have to work from. And usually they're fairly smart and attentive, and they will notice any of those small details. So try not to fall into some of those sort of typical kinds of issues that we come across in grant writing. So what I want to finish with this morning is just to remind you that grant writing is something that needs to be a part of your business planning cycles. It should be a part of your planning. You should say, we want to do one grant this year. We want to do, we want to draft something. We want to start into this process. We want to be realistic about how we're going to do it. Identify some goals for yourself each year and begin. You want to have regular dialogues inside your workplace about the work. One of the reasons why you do this too, of building this business culture, is that your staff will be sitting on committees. They will be networking, they will be hearing about other funding opportunities, and you want them to come back excited and say, hey, I heard about this great grant opportunity. What do you think? Remember, it's both technical and creative. So yes, you have to remember to push the submit button at the end of your grant. You need to understand electronic submissions. You need to understand how to read your document in an electronic format. But you also have to tell a story, and a compelling story. So there's two parts of your brain working here, and they need to work well together. Finally, from my experience, as I mentioned at the beginning, I have done relatively well grant writing, had some success, but also had some, just some incredibly difficult learning lessons where grants I thought were going to be funded weren't. And so we need to come back to that place of humility, to accept feedback and to learn from our failures, but to be determined to keep getting funded. Our Caring Dads program here in Kingston, the first time out of the gate to the Ontario Trillium Foundation, we were so convinced we were going to get the money. They sent it back for very specific reasons around our program evaluation. We didn't give up. We addressed their constructive feedback, and then the next round of funding, we were successfully funded for Caring Dads. And Caring Dads has been successfully funded now here in Kingston for about 8 years from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. But that started from a really painful lesson on how to fill out the Ontario Trillium, what they're looking for, the details. And so it can be done, but be patient and be kind to yourself and your team. So I am going to finish the formal presentation. If you have questions or you would like a particular slide, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this point. And I certainly thank you again for attending. It's been a pleasure and an honor to speak to you as female entrepreneurs, as one myself, developing a consulting business. I certainly recognize, some of the challenges inherent in developing our businesses here in our local communities.
Thank you so much, Donna. And I know there have been a couple questions that have popped up into the chat, so I will highlight those for you. Elizabeth was asking you, and you touched on this a little bit about the planning part for small business owners, solopreneurs in particular, who don't have a lot of extra time. What is your suggestion for building in time for grant writing? How much time, for instance, would it absorb? And secondly, are there services to help support business owners as they are applying for these grants?
So thanks for the question. So I'll tell you what I did as an executive director when I was working at Resolve Counseling Services. I would set aside time every week. So about a half an hour every week, I would set aside. Why did I set that time aside? I knew that I wouldn't do it if it wasn't put into my schedule. So I would go on to foundation websites. I would go on to the government websites. I would dig around to see, what programs were being funded, what the deadlines were. Did our agency seem like a good fit for the funding application? And I also, when we were in the middle of grant writing, so for example, United Way funding applications come out in September, I believe it's September, and they're due a couple of months later. So my strategy was to work for 15 minutes every day on that grant. And I never left it to the last minute. I worked every single day diligently at it. I really don't believe grant writing is best done on a compressed time schedule. So I would just block time out every single day. If not every day, a couple times a week, I would sit down, work on that grant, answer the questions, do what I could within a half an hour period of time and stop, come back to it again. So it's better to schedule it and tackle it on a regular basis than to try to do it at the last minute, especially when you have technical glitches, which many of these electronic funding applications do. So better to start small and tackle it on a weekly basis. For example, for myself, I would just go look, see what was out there. If there was something interesting, pass it off to a manager. Look, I found this. What do you think? Can we do it? Yes, no, green light, red light. And then we would take it from there. So in terms of support for grant writing, I'm certainly happy to help support local businesses in your grant writing. And there are other grant writing support organizations here in Kingston. The best support also comes from the funder themselves. So on many kind of funder websites, they will give you examples of other organizations they've funded. Sometimes they will give you successful grants previously that they've received. Ontario Trillium Foundation, for example, has a lot of really good tips for grant writing. So they will walk you through some of the challenges in their grants and give highlights and tips to, the kinds of things they're looking for in a successful grant. So it is perfectly acceptable to pick up the phone and speak to a foundation and ask them what they're looking for, what kinds of projects they're open to funding. And then that's a really good starting place, of course. But there are lots of services in Kingston. I believe you had a presentation from somebody last year as well, Nancy, who also does grant writing support. So there are lots of people around who will help with grant writing, or at least reviewing your grants and giving you feedback on those grants. So you should never feel alone. And in fact, it is good to get feedback, whether it's from another person who's managed to receive successful funding from an organization and knows a little bit about some of the sort of typical stumbling blocks, or from one of your employees. It's always good to know what your employees are good at. Sometimes they've had previous grant writing experience, and when they've got quiet time, they can be reviewing your grant writing for you as well. So I think it's really important to have fresh eyes sooner than later on any grant that you write. Feedback is helpful. As I said, we're sort of always biased towards our own writing, and it's hard to self-critique.
And I'll just slide in there before I ask the next question, Donna, that I know that, for instance, Ontario Trillium, or the Trillium grants, there's many successful applications that are posted online. So you can actually Google that successful Ontario Trillium grant, and then you see what a successful one looks like. I'm a big template believer. I'm a big believer in how did it work for them and let me learn from them, right? So
right, exactly.
Google successful applications and then like the name of the grant perhaps, or like a big one like Ontario Trillium. And the second, I think Elizabeth asked this question about supports. As you mentioned, there's some certainly in the Kingston area, but no matter where you are, if you're on LinkedIn, and I hope you're on LinkedIn as a female business owner, then just search in the LinkedIn, search grant writer, and you could even add the name of your city, or, if that helps. I've found like that's usually my go-to method for finding professionals. And so, yeah, use LinkedIn to your advantage. And if you're not on LinkedIn yet, get on it. I think it would be a good idea. And also, if you don't know anything about LinkedIn, on our YouTube channel, which I've posted a few times inside the chat, there is a full seminar on LinkedIn as well for you. I'm just going to go to the next question. And then folks, I'm going to post a link to our upcoming events. So there's, I think, 7 more events coming up over the next couple of months for women entrepreneurs. So that's about to be dropped into the chat, along with, I'm excited to say, our first in-person event in the last 2 years. So I'm very excited. I hope that some of you will be able to make that if you're in the greater Kingston region. So the question for you is, around oral applications. So Candace asked a great question. Let's say someone had accessibility barriers or language barriers, etc. Are you able to apply for grants in an oral method rather than writing everything out? I thought that was a great question.
That is a great question, and I am stumped. I'm not 100% sure. It's I think I'm not sure. You would have to speak to the grant writer. Again, remember that usually the funders want you to be successful. And I know that's a strange way to think about it because lots of funding applications aren't successful, but they want you to succeed in your grant writing application. Many foundations, if you take the time to go to the Philanthropic Foundations of Canada website, you will see how much money is sitting in those foundations unspent every year. It's shocking. So they have a certain percentage of their assets which they have to spend every year on grant writing. Remember that. They also want you to be successful in your attempts to get funding. They want to help you. And it's very possible that if you tell them there is an accessibility requirement, they will accommodate you. They may not know how to do it. They may need to take your lead on it. But most foundations are fairly gracious, and my experience of them is that they will accommodate if you request it. And why? Because they want you to be successful. It's sort of a strange contradiction that they do want to help you. They want you to succeed in your application, and they will do what they can to make that happen. If they don't know that you need an accommodation, they won't accommodate. And we're not far enough on disability rights, unfortunately, in the province of Ontario, for that to just be something about how we put out our requests for funding applications. So in that case, don't be shy, request the accommodation or ask for some help in problem solving. And my guess is that they will either have you come to a panel or a Zoom, or somehow they will accommodate so that you can do it in the way that's most comfortable for you. Rest assured, you'll still have to answer all the questions. And they will want to make sure that you address all of the questions from the grant application. But I would be so surprised if there wasn't a way to accommodate it. I'm not familiar enough with it, but I'm certainly familiar with foundations to know what they want to see happen in the granting application process. So please advocate for yourself, and you will likely be successful.
I 100% agree. And I actually, in Ontario, it is now the law that we can, serve people under AODA legislation, that, organizations are definitely required to provide different methods. I think you're hearing from us that we're not sure exactly what those are, but I would be shocked if they're not on the main website somewhere. And as Donna so well pointed out, email them or call them, or whatever is the best mode of communication. Donna, one more question as we wrap up today. Actually, it was, I think you referenced a website to find untapped resources. I think that was something that you said, and Sarah's asking what that website.
Well, there's two things I did find. So there's the Philanthropic Foundation of Canada. It's on, let me just go back.
Philanthropic Canada.
Yeah, Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, that you'll see.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I'll just go back to the slide where it's mentioned. So the HTTPS pfca.ca, about our members. And so there's some really good information there about philanthropic foundations. So you can go there and see the themes. You're going to have to, again, do a little bit of research, spend some time on their sites. I did Google this morning, entrepreneurs, business foundations. And I found one that I hadn't seen before, called the Lochran Foundation. And they do support small businesses. And let me see if I can find the slide. I wrote down the information, but it's LOCHREN. They did ask you to email them to initiate a conversation about funding possibilities. I didn't go that far because I didn't want to initiate a relationship with them at this point in time, but that was where I ended up. And one final thing I just want to make a point of that, don't think you're limited to Canadian foundations and funding opportunities as Canadian citizens. Sometimes there are American foundations that do provide funding in Canada. I know that's sort of surprising, but that can be the case. So it was called the Lochran Foundation, LOCHREN Foundation. And so that was one that came up when I Googled simply female entrepreneur, small business, grant funding. That came up pretty quickly. So again, I spent some time this morning just digging around. Certainly the Philanthropic Foundation has all of the main foundations and their areas of interest and all their assets. So we'll tell you a little bit about those foundations as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Donna. I know there have been a lot of questions. We've covered a lot of material. Folks, I did put the YouTube channel in there several times for those of you who were wanting to get a recording. If for some reason you missed it, just reach out to the Eventbrite link that you signed up with today. That email should come to me. And if not, again, my email was noted in the chat as well. On behalf of all of us, Donna, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience. Every time that we learn a little bit more, we're able to push a little bit further. And I loved what you said about the fact that we should never stop working to get funded, because that is just gonna, it's a part of our business plan. It's not the full business plan, of course, but it certainly is important. And so folks, just watch your We Can Weekly News Digest, particularly if you're a Kingston owned women-led business. Those will be coming at you every Monday morning. On behalf of all of us, thank you and miigwech. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.